I call to order the October 9th, 2017 meeting of the Victoria City Council. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Lori, any changes on the agenda?
I did make a modification earlier, but I just wanted to highlight that item 4G on the consent agenda was deleted. There are no other changes.
All right, thank you. Council, any changes?
None.
All right, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda as written.
Second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The agenda is adopted. Open forum. I've got 5 requests. So I ask each speaker to please limit your time to the 5 minutes so that we can get everybody. First up, Judy Black.
Hi, Judy Black, 1938 Woodstone Drive. Mayor, Council, as you will know, I've been coming here for 6 months now, asking for the fighting to stop, for the appeal to stop, and to put the welfare of the city first. None of that has happened. Final arguments have gone into the appeals court, and we are awaiting their decision. Letters, phone calls, recorded meetings, and emails have been sent back and forth. Attorney General opinions have been requested. Threats of more litigation have arisen, and a huge amount of city time has been dedicated to this because Mayor Funk and the other litigant citizens claim the taxpayers should not have to pay the defendant council members' defense fees because they were found guilty of open meeting law violations. The defendants were fined for those violations and paid their fines personally. Many of us believe that should have been the end of it. However, the mayor and the other litigant citizens did not agree with all of the court's findings and appealed the court's decision, resulting in more defense legal fees that has a remaining balance of $25,000. And as of the end of August, the cost to the taxpayers to fight this payment is now $20,000. So as we see it, this fight really isn't showing fiscal responsibility on our behalf. We are at a stalemate here. Neither side will budge, and we, the people of Victoria, are caught in the middle. So I'm offering a third option, hopefully one that will end this discontent and solve the issue at hand. Let the people decide. Though there are those that agree with the litigant citizens and do not want to pay defense fees with their tax dollars. Okay. There are also those that disagree and believe our city council members deserve to be defended by us. Therefore, I'm asking that the city set up a litigation defense fund for the defendant council members that will be funded strictly by donation. No more dipping into the taxpayers' money. No more arguing if we should pay. Those that believe the defendant's legal fees should be paid can donate to the fund. Those that don't, won't. This way, the city may pay, as described by law, with donated funds from the people that want to support the defendant's council members' defense costs. I believe this is a fair and viable option, and I'm asking that you consider my suggestion and move forward with it. I saw we have a very full agenda tonight on items that will move Victoria forward for the good, so this topic can be an agenda item to be discussed at the next meeting if you wish. I also saw that there will be an open house on October 25th to discuss the 2040 comprehensive plan. And thank you for that. Allowing the people to offer input for our future and bring a better understanding of the city's goals are huge. This, as well as the settlement on how the defense attorney's fees are to be paid, will be a big step in the right direction to bring council's approval rating back up and bring harmony back to our beloved city. What do you think? Anything? Okay, thank you.
Questions?
Any questions?
First of all, thank you for stepping up. I appreciate now we have an opportunity to interact, which is a good thing. I too hope it goes away soon. It has been a difficult year for all of us to go through, but it is an issue, and we all have to deal with it. And you personally have taken a lot of time to get to know and understand the issues, and that's a big thing. There's been countless documents to have to go through, hundreds of pages of legal issues, and you have studied that, and I commend you for that. That's a great thing. You've also been active behind the scenes. You've filed a complaint with the Carver County Sheriffs about the mayor's potential conflict. You've you've spoken with the Minnesota Lawyers Professional Responsibility Board about Mr. Kildall's potential.
Well, I haven't done
misconduct.
that yet.
No, but you've.
I looked
inquired
into
about
it.
Correct. I didn't say you filed it, but you inquired about it. You've worked closely with Councilmember Vogt to bring a censure motion
Yes.
against the mayor. You've done a lot, which,
Yes.
again, I commend you for that. My question for you is, what have you done to inform yourself about our city attorney's potential conflict of interest?
What do you mean by that?
When I brought up the issue about Mr. Vos and whether we should change attorneys, I raised that issue that he himself has a potential conflict of interest. And I'm just wondering if you've inquired about that, if you've informed yourself about that at all.
Well, I got in a little trouble trying to get into the legal part of it last time, so I stepped aside on that. From what I understood, he checked with the Lawyers Professional Responsibility Board, and they said he did not have a conflict, and I believe him on that.
Correct, but the question that he posed seemed to have little to do with our real conflict, which was the issue Mr. Kildall raised in the May 25th letter of 2016, and he also raised the same issue on March 10th of this year, which was the malpractice, the professional negligence on the part of Kennedy and Graven, which is the same issue that Professor Painter raised in his declaration. But that's not the question that Mr. Vos posed to the Minnesota Lawyers Professional Responsibility Board. He posed a question that was quite different than that issue. Plus, the inquirer at the board also directed Mr. Vos to invite Mr. Kildall to restate his argument, and I think the implication was to go to Mr. Kildall, have him restate the argument, and then send that argument into the board itself.
I'm sorry, if I may. Ms. Black asked to address the council regarding the appeal, and
Right.
I don't believe at any point did she mention anything about this subject, so I find it
No,
out of step and inappropriate to be going this direction.
that's fine. No, that's fine, and that's
Then
fair.
let's-
But
then let's
this
stop.
this is a new rule, and like I said, Ms. Black has been very involved all year long, and was instrumental in bringing the censure, the sanction vote, which for me I thought was an abuse of power on the part of the council members. So I'm not here to fight, but there are two sides to this issue, and it's important. It's important
She has nothing.
for.
One at a time. The Councilmember Gregory, she did not raise this issue. You're making valid points, but let's stay to the points that she actually raised. Those issues you're raising, we can bring up another time. I think they're valid, but that's not what Ms. Black was speaking to. Let's confine our comments, everybody on the council, with this change of rules to whatever the resident brings up in their short statement. So,
Fair enough.
I think we should limit ourselves to 5 minutes also.
Again, thank
correct.
you for stepping forward and getting involved, and that's a good thing. I appreciate it.
I have just one comment. The legal process takes a long time and it's expensive. I do not think it's good public policy to pay the legal fees of an elected official who's been found by a court to have intentionally violated the law. Furthermore, the Minnesota Supreme Court has already ruled that the cross appeal cannot go forward. Therefore, those convictions for that intentional violation of the law can never be changed. If this litigation, regardless of which side wins or loses in the appellate ruling, either side could choose to further litigate the issue, which could result in hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional legal fees. There is not a single case that I've been able to find where any city has paid the legal fees of any elected official found to have intentionally violated the law. Therefore, I don't think City of Victoria should do that. I'm not opposed to your idea. If the residents of Victoria believe that they should be reimbursed and they want to start a fund for those people that have been found, great, that's fine. That's up to the residents. But as a city policy, I think it's bad policy for the residents to have to pay those bills.
Well, the only reason I said the city is because the city is allowed to pay. I don't know that.
Well, I disagree with that statement, but okay.
Well, it's said in the statute.
No, it did not. There's questions of law as far as the open meeting law clearly says public body. Ms. Hokanen, regardless of what memo she got from the city attorney, is not the public body. The public body is this council. This council sets policy, not Ms. Hokanen. So there's questions and there's debates about whether or not the law said that. And the Attorney General opinion clearly stated that the open meeting law states that the city may pay.
Right. That's what I was talking about. But since you don't want to, I'm just asking that we set up a defense fund.
Well, that's fine. I wouldn't oppose that.
Is
If
that
the
okay?
residents want to do, that has nothing to do with the city as far as I'm concerned. If the residents want to get together and pay the personal defense cost of those elected officials, that's up to the residents to do.
I don't know if they're allowed to do that. I think it has to go through the city.
I don't know why it would.
Is that a legal thing?
Invoices are directly made out to the public officials.
I think I'd have to ask the city attorney about that because I don't know. You know, I'm not a lawyer, so I have to. I just thought that because these are attorney's fees for them, that it would have to, the fund would have to go to the city, and then the city would pay. Is that true or no?
Mayor, do you want me to respond?
No, we're not going to get into this debate tonight. If you want to have this discussed, we can bring this up at another council meeting. As far as I'm concerned, and as far as I remember, rather, and Lori, correct me if I'm wrong, aren't those invoices sent directly to the defendants?
No, Mayor, they're not. They're sent directly to the city.
In
The
care of the defendants?
The defendants may receive copies, but I receive copies directly.
All right. In my opinion, that doesn't change
I'd like to
anything.
hear
But
the attorney, because you
Right,
have
fair.
all had an opportunity to speak, and you're
fair enough.
denying the ability
Bob?
for the- Thank you.
Well, Mayor and Council, I guess the proposal of setting up a defense fund and how that would work would be something I'd want to think more about if that was something the council wanted to pursue. But as to whether citizens could set up a defense fund separate from the city, I think the answer is yes. Could the city set it up? I think in the abstract, the answer is yes. I'd want to work through the details, but I think theoretically it could be done either way.
Well, see, I wasn't aware if it could. That's why I wanted to know. Okay.
Okay, council,
Yeah, I think it is also worth mentioning that the mayor could make a decision right here and right now that whatever the answer is that comes back from the appeals board, he won't take it further, and then there are no more legal fees, period. So this idea that this is somehow out of his control and that the potential hundreds of thousands of dollars of additional legal expense or something he has no influence over is it's kind of a bit of an oversight, I think. And it's also probably worth noting that these only exist because you feel you know better than the judge what is appropriate justice and decided that the day you filed the lawsuit, and are unwilling to stop until you get what you feel is justice, independent of what the judge felt. And the court settled the matter, regardless of what the defendants feel about the judgment. They paid the fines and moved on. It's only your additional action that has caused any further expense. So I just think that that needs to be clear and on the record.
So as I've
all I
stated
have to
before, I'm not the only plaintiffs. There are others. It is not my decision and not my decision alone. I also stated previously, I'm not going to discuss what's going to happen until the appellate court rules. The judges have it. They're working on it. I don't want to interfere in that process. Once they've issued their decision, the plaintiffs will get together and decide what the plaintiffs as a group want to do. Beyond that, I'm not going to comment on litigation that's pending before the appellate court.
Okay, so it's okay to set up a defense fund then?
Bob, you said there's nothing that prevents them from doing that if they so wish, right?
Mayor, I said that the citizens could do that, or the city could do that, I think. We'd have to work through that. I'm not sure what the will of the council is, though, so.
Okay, we
Do
can
you want to
put-
think about
I
it?
wouldn't object to the citizens
the-
putting together a fund. That would be
Okay,
great.
So if the council's going to be involved, if that's what you're requesting, that needs to be put onto an agenda so other people in the city can know and come in and speak to that. If you want to do it independent of the council, I think the answer is you clearly have the ability to do that.
okay.
So, council, final comments, or am I going to call the next speaker? All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Stephen Ringquist, thank you. Name and address for the record, please.
Stephen Ringquist, 8135 Hawthorne Place. I don't know if I can follow that. I'll be much more brief, and thank you all for your service and time in doing this. I appreciate it as a resident. I am a resident of Victoria and a member of the Victoria Business Owners Association. And I come to you regarding a very good problem that we have as a city. It's parking, and it's a problem that the city has created with the the thought that we're going to have to solve this problem at some point. And the ordinance that I'm referring to is the applicable ordinance is 109-125, which allows new business, new development. To basically have their parking requirement, and so that's been going on for a lot of time. And
Let me interrupt for just a second. Kara, do you know, is that the shared parking ordinance that he's referring to?
It is, yes.
It is? Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
actually, I have copies if you guys want to look at it. Anyway, so currently there's 265 public stalls.
I'm sorry, for the benefit of the council, could you repeat that ordinance number you said?
Yep. So there's a few of them. There's section 109-123.
Thank you.
109-124, and 109-125.
Thanks. Please proceed.
Yep. So there's 265 public stalls and 95 private stalls, and the majority of those are the grocery store. The private stalls are the grocery store and Klein Bank. And I guess what we're asking is I know there's another agenda item coming up regarding the creamery, and I guess it's a perfect time to bring this up because that's another major like Klein Bank or grocery store that's going to bring a lot of people, which is great. We're really happy about that. And then we also have Victoria Flats coming in, which is going to bring a lot more customers, which we're happy about. But we're asking that the ordinance, the 50% rule, be stripped from the ordinance at some point. And then also a couple other recommendations or thoughts for the council to consider. Immediate would be a parking lot on the creamery, a parking area, which is the old Inky building. Long-term would be negotiate with other landowners to expand the municipal lot. And then longer term would be a bond for a parking structure of some sort. And I don't know that, I haven't polled anyone, but I think a lot of people would be open to that. From a citizen standpoint, I would be. I enjoy coming down to downtown and parking and enjoying downtown. And I guess that's the other concern that we have is with all these other buildings and structures coming in, like a coffee shop, someone who wants coffee in the morning, that business is going to suffer if there isn't parking available with all these other people. And so I know that the new steakhouse creamery building is going to house, I think, 100 tables or something like that, and that's going to be a lot of new patrons. So I guess the issue that I'm reiterating is for you guys to consider parking now, and some of the solutions that I've given.
Council, comments?
I think the parking issue is very germane. As a matter of fact, I have a list of questions when we discuss the creamery project. I think we have to look at the parking globally. One of the things that I want to see is a tally. Your statistics are a little bit off. I think there are a few more spaces than you think. And there's some plans for additional spaces coming in the next year or so. But I think what we need to do is keep a tally on what all the building parking requirements are for all the different buildings in the downtown area. Compare that to our known parking spots and monitor it so that we're in front of the curve, and instead of asking questions afterwards. But everything you brought up is probably very pertinent. A parking ramp, of course, is very expensive, but eventually it'll probably have to come. We're expanding Steger Lane, redoing it, and that study is taking place right now, but that'll add quite a few parking spots. But you're right, there is a parking issue. I was on the Planning Commission in 2003, 2004, and every time we brought up the fact that we should be concerned with parking, people said, well, what are you talking about? Let's don't talk about parking. Of course, that's all changed now. It's the reverse, and rightfully so. So I think you have good points, but I think it is also manageable too. It's not the end. It's the beginning.
Yeah, it's a great problem to have.
Yeah.
And those stats that I took were from staff, city staff. So I think they should be correct. And as far as just the two main things is just to consider parking for the creamery and ordinance, getting rid of that 50% rule. Because if you keep going down that path with more and more development, there really isn't going to be, there's going to be an issue with the businesses in the area as far as who's getting what parking and where people can park and whose patrons are being serviced. And it's ready to, as far as we're concerned, we should get it ahead of this now as a potential problem and future problem. And so that's why we're bringing this to you.
The two quick comments. Number one, I think a lot of these parking problems started with the shared parking ordinance. And this is one of the things that I think that this council needs to take up and look at. That suggestion, I think, has merit and needs to be discussed and debated. The other thing that I think, in addition to the shared parking, is the fact that when we do these PUDs and we decrease the number of parking stalls that a developer has to put in, compounds that issue on top of the shared parking. So I think in combination, those two issues have been primary root cause issues as far as the parking issues that we see today. And I cite as an example this building, when that land swap happened, the money that was supposed to go into parking was diverted at that time to pay the Bayfront Plaza that's behind us. And so that money didn't even go into a parking fund. And so we got no parking out of it at all, even though we were supposed to get, I don't remember the exact number, 12, 13 spots, something like this. So back to the core issue, I think that shared parking ordinance is something that this council needs to take up and address, along with when we do PUDs or other developments, whether we cut back on the parking requirements or we hold a firm line on that. So thanks for bringing that to the attention of the council from your perspective.
May I comment, sir?
Yep, go ahead.
I think I agree with what you're saying. We have talked as a council over the past 6 years a number of times about how to bring more parking to downtown, and it has been, the approach that's been taken at this point has been, I called it a domino effect, and you have to have one domino fall to trip off the next one. And I think it's time that we get back together, and I'd like to request of the city manager that let's have a workshop on the subject to get all the plans that we've had in the past and all the things that we've considered back on the table in front of the citizens, and let's go address it again.
One more last thing. We also ask if you have TIF funds available to use that towards the central parking as well, or just to consider that as another option. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have one quick question. Is this the official position of the VBOA? You're speaking on behalf of the
Yep, I'm
organization?
part of the board, and we came together and discussed this. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Yep.
Joseph Scott.
He's on the VBA as well. He copied me, so.
Okay.
Okay, so you spoke for him? All right, thanks. Peter O'Gorman. Name and address for the record, please.
Peter O'Gorman, 729 Gannon Way. Mayor, members of the City Council, quid pro quo. These past several meetings prove beyond a doubt that there's corruption happening in our city. Jim Crowley and Tom Striegel were convicted of intentionally hiding important decisions from the public. The defenders spent the entire amount of insurance that the city can claim defending them. They lost. The plaintiffs in that suit, though I'm not one of them, but I agree with them, they didn't think that the public servants who broke the trust of those they were supposed to be representing should serve any longer on the council. So they're appealing the case to make sure that those who were convicted would no longer be allowed to serve on the Victoria City Council. Because the full amount of insurance was paid in the primary case, the legal bills of the appeals process started coming to Crowley and Striegel. They voted to have their bills paid with taxpayer money using the consent agenda several times in 2016. That has got to be illegal for a public official to do, and it is certainly unethical. And why that hasn't been talked about more at these meetings is beyond me. Why the city attorney allowed that to take place last year and continues to attempt to make those actions appear legitimate, in my opinion, acknowledges his complicity in the matter. After the defendants in the case claimed that Kennedy and Graven were at fault for their mistakes that they made when they broke the open meeting law dozens of times, the firm should have been fired. They weren't. The council's 3-2 vote to retain Kennedy and Graven as the city's legal advisor at the city council meeting in September provided proof positive that they're looking out for each other and not the taxpayers. Quid pro quo. Whether there's a formal arrangement between the defendants and the city attorney has yet to be seen, but their actions speak as loudly as they need to, even for simple people like myself to understand. The city attorney maintains the appearance that us, as taxpayers, paying the defendant's legal bills is legitimate, and then they hold off from firing him or suing him or his firm for malpractice. Crowley and Striegel get their legal bills paid, and the attorney keeps his job, and his firm doesn't get sued. There could be no other explanation for the actions of the council in retaining the very people that they blamed for their illegal activity in the first place. Political corruption is a manipulation of policies, institutions, rules of procedure in the allocation of resources and financing by political decision makers who abuse their position to sustain their power, status, and wealth. And I don't know how you plan to resolve all of this as a group, but you've exposed the quid pro quo scheme, and it's unethical and immoral, and I would speculate illegal. As a taxpayer, I don't owe the defendants anything because they broke the law and got caught. Don't pay their legal fees. If any other city employee were to have broken the law by lying to the public or keeping information away from the public about important issues, they'd be fired on the spot. Yet we still have 2 councilors convicted of hiding things from us, representing us on this council. Thanks for your time.
Council, any comments? Okay, next, Vince Baudette. Name and address for the record, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Vince Baudette, 1185 79th Street. I'm not feeling 100% tonight, so the good news is I'll keep this as short as I can. This has to do with, my notes, my comments just have to do with optics. On 11 September, I believe, city manager stated repeatedly that, or told us why payment should be made on behalf of these defendants of OML. But my problem with all of that is optics. It's terrible optics to make these payments for these people after a consent agenda. Now, I know we have procedures here in City Council, but really and truly, that's the thing that keeps me going, and that's the thing that I want to get an answer from or for. Why was it determined that these payments should be made in a consent agenda? The public is far less likely to find out about these things and know these things. And the same would go for Councilman Crowley. I understand that you want to take this whole litigation item off of or out of City Council meetings going forward. That kind of sounds self-serving, with all due respect. I'd feel better about that if that motion were made instead by one of the non-defendants and then voted on accordingly. I'll leave my comments at that, and if anybody has a comment back, that's fine. Okay.
Council? Okay. Anybody else that wants to address the council? Okay, seeing none, the next item is the consent agenda. Lori, we talked about the one removal. Council, is there any other thing that that somebody wants removed or discussed?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to pull item H off the agenda.
Item H.
Yeah.
Any members of the public want anything removed? Seeing none? Okay. With the exception of item H, if there's nothing else, can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda minus items G and H?
I'll make a motion we approve the consent agenda minus items G and H.
Second?
Second motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is approved. We'll take up now immediately we will not address item G because that's removed entirely, but we will pick up item H. Councilmember Gregory, since you pulled that, would you please start?
Yes, I just wanted to formally thank Ms. Jeanette June for stepping forward and putting her name on the for Park and Rec. And as the council liaison to the Park and Rec, I just wanted to formally thank you and welcome you to the Park and Rec.
Hear, hear. Anything else? With that, I move we approve item H. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Item H is approved unanimously. Next item, there's no staff report. We have a single donation. Can we get unless the council wants to discuss, can we get the resolution up on the screen, please? Anybody have the resolution up? All right, can I get a motion?
Sorry, we don't normally bring these up.
It was just the one, wasn't it?
Correct.
I move we accept the donation from Councilmember Gregory for $100 and thank him for that. Is there a second?
I'll second motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The donation is accepted. Okay, the next item, Lori, do you want to do a brief introduction or should we just bring Richard Ford up?
That's fine.
Richard, if you would, for the record, please state your name and your position so that people know. And for the public, this is a visitor's presentation. Please go ahead.
My name is Rick Ford, and I am the Advancement Director for Eastern Carver County Schools and also the Executive Director of the District 112 Foundation. The 112 Foundation is a nonprofit organization separate from the school district with an independent board of directors who reside in all 4 cities within the district. In fact, we have one of our board members here, Gina. Now, I have a question for everyone in the room. Did anyone in this room attend school in the public school district 112? How about your children? Grandchildren? Great. No, I won't go there. Okay. Okay, did you know that the first graduating class from Chaska High School was 1906? 1906. So, why is this significant? It's significant because our public school district 112 is 112 years old. Okay. So for the first time in the district's 112 years, the foundation is sponsoring a charitable direct mail campaign. When you get your mail the second week of November, it'll be the first time in 112 years that every household in Victoria, Carver, Chanhassen, and Chaska will have received a direct mail request from the District 112 Foundation to support our children, our students. Now, we have a lot of time to make up, guys. I mean, don't you think? 112 years, we got a lot of making up to do here. Now, the foundation's goals include supporting student activities, reducing students' economic insecurity, building an alumni association, creating an endowment fund. We have a Teacher of the Year award. We have teacher grants that we also honor. And if you look, now some of you may have picked up cards as you came in. And if you look at your cards, you'll see that we have a number of them. There's Taking Care of Our Own, which is about food. This is where there are contributions for a backpack program where children who would not have food to eat over the weekend get a backpack of food on a Friday, and they can take that home with them over the weekend. We have Science and Engineering. This is the robotics piece. This is where an individual donated to the robotics program so that they could compete on the statewide and national level. Without their contributions, we would not have had the robotics product or program. Excellence in Fine Arts and Activities. When people are in speech and different types of competitions, theater, whatever, and they win, now they go on the road, and guess what? They've got, they got to pay for lodging, they've got to pay for the fees for the competition. So a lot of times families don't have that money, and so then we come up with the funds for that. Innovation in Classrooms of the Future. This is where in the school district, if you haven't been through this, how many of you have been through the school district lately? Gone into the schools? Okay. What you're going to find out, it's a lot different than when you guys went to school. I tell you, it's very different. There's a thing called personalized learning. Personalized learning is not like what we had. We had rows of chairs and tables, and the teacher was in front, and they were directing you to be quiet and listen and get the instruction. And now, today, the kids, the students, are more in control of the classes that they're taking and the locations of where they're getting their information from. So this is innovation in classrooms that's going on. And it's they have tours. You should take a tour of the school district. Even Victoria Elementary has personalized learning. Okay, so if you look at the cards, then it's food, fees, supplies, and STEM, which is with robotics. So how much do we want to raise? What's our goal? Well, if we look at the public school foundations around us, they're averaging $100,000 to $800,000 a year in contributions annually. So I have one request for everyone, 112. You're financially able to do it, please give $112 in November. So that this is coming out November 8th. It should be in your mailbox. Give $112 because 112 is for 112. Watch your mailbox this November and look for more information on how you can support your District 112 Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, comments, questions?
Thank you.
And just to let you know, this is what this just came off the press. This is what it's going to look like when you pull it out of your mail.
Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, new business. Kara, update on Lakeside Drive connection, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This item is on the agenda tonight as new business, but it is something that's been discussed by the City Council over the last couple of years, actually. Specifically, what we're talking about tonight is construction of the missing link of Lakeside Drive, which is being constructed as part of the Laketown 9th development that Lennar is completing. But it's the connection between these houses all over here and Lakeside Drive, which continues on to Red Fox and the elementary school. So certainly this is a very important connection that the city and the developer are interested in seeing in place as soon as possible. By way of reminder for the City Council, the reason why this segment of road has not yet been built is that a surcharge is in place. So these are a couple of photos from last week of the area between Laketown and Lake Wasserman Woods. And when you drive by, it looks like nothing's actually occurring because there isn't any workers in the area, but in fact, there is a surcharge in place. So 7 feet of soil placed over this area to allow the soils underneath what will be the roadway to consolidate over time. This road is being constructed through a wetland, which is unique. We don't do that very often, so we are dealing with a situation that isn't something we commonly encounter. As the council is aware that the developer and the developer's consultants have been monitoring settlement of the surcharge for a long period of time. This graphic here just shows the location of the settlement plates that are being monitored. So these plates are in place, and a surveyor comes out every 2 weeks to shoot elevations to see how much the soils are settling over time. Included with your staff report, was a report from Braun Intertech summarizing the surcharge process and the settlement that's been ongoing. These next couple slides are from that report. But essentially what they are finding is that the soils beneath the surcharge, or the surcharge themselves, is continuing to settle. So this is a graph of settlement over time, so number of days since the surcharge was in place and the amount of settlement that is occurring. This is just a zoomed in area on the 2 areas that are settling the worst. And what you'll note is that settlement is continuing to occur over time. What they would prefer to see is for that settlement to start to level off. So a number of months ago, weeks ago, coming into September, we were operating on this part of the curve and hoping to continue to see it sort of level off in this manner, but instead the soils have continued to settle more significantly. Due to that ongoing settlement, Braun is recommending that the surcharge remain in place through the winter. If it were to be removed and a road would be constructed today, we could expect to see 3 to 4 inches of settlement in that road in the next 1 to 2 years, which is significant when you're talking about a roadway. That wouldn't be something that we could just leave in place. The concrete curb and gutter would settle, so we would have to replace all the concrete curb and gutter, remove the pavement, add class 5, and regrade and repave the road through that area. So while 3 to 4 inches maybe doesn't sound like a lot in road construction, that's considered a pretty significant amount of settlement that would not need to be fixed. Lennar provided a letter requesting a time extension to allow the surcharge to remain in place as recommended by their geotechnical engineer. Construction would resume as soon as road restrictions are lifted in the spring, with an estimated time of construction through substantial completion of about 10 weeks. We specifically requested that they note it in terms of weeks as opposed to a set date, because if road restrictions come off earlier in the year, we want them to get started right away. We don't want them to wait till June to start working on this. We'd want them to get started as soon as possible. Staff is recommending that we grant that extension in accordance with the development agreement that would be accomplished through an written extension authorized by me. With that, I certainly will take questions, but I'd like to note that representatives from Lennar, Joe Jablonski, and Eric Johnson from Braun Intertech are in the audience to answer any technical questions you might have, as they will be more equipped to do that than I.
Quick question. Is there any way to put more fill or do something that's simple and cost-effective to speed that process up, or is this the best way to do it? There's no way we can accelerate that?
This was the recommended process by Braun after reviewing a whole number of different options. Certainly, if you want more information, Eric could speak to that.
Eric? For the record, please, name and position.
Eric Johnson, Braun Intertech, project engineer. That was one thing that was considered, a taller surcharge, but the thing we had to really worry about was the stability of the swamp. We constructed it in a staged manner, because if you place the fill too fast, you'll fail the swamp, pushing the soil out into the wetland, causing a much worse problem than what we have right now.
So there's really no simple solution to speed this up other than just give it time?
Correct.
Bridge.
What makes you sure that 6 months is the right amount of time?
Based on just some experience in other similar projects we've worked with, observing the settlement we've seen throughout the process, we thought it would trend maybe a little bit faster than it has, but there's one spot where kind of in between those two that are sloping, that are between SP1 and SP2 on the graph there, there's about 40 feet of organic soil. And it goes down very fast and comes right back up. It was a deep old creek or ditch or something that's been filled in over the years. So just based on that, I think I'm very confident that 6 more months we're going to have a good product.
So there's no possibility we'll extend again, or there's some possibility?
I'd say very minimal possibility that would happen.
As a point of reference, back on the one slide, it looked like it was settling the inches. For sake of argument, the faster ones are 16, 17 inches. I mean, what are you looking for? Settlement of less than a half an inch or a quarter of an inch? Is there some metric that you're trying to hit?
We're just trying to look for a trend where it's starting to curve and flatten out. It's never going to truly stop settling because we're sitting on the amount of organics that we are at. We're just looking for it to slow down prior to removing the settlement or the surcharge.
Council, other questions?
So this is kind of a first in the 7 years that I've sat up here. I think this is the first time things didn't pan out the way we anticipated, and I guess I worry a little bit that this is a harbinger of future problems that we may have with this roadway in terms of ongoing settling and maintenance costs. Can you hazard any guesses as to why this didn't play out the way it was expected to, and what the risk looks like going forward to this road?
I guess I would say it hasn't necessarily panned out the way we hadn't thought it would. We knew it would have to be on there for at least 6 months. It's really hard to predict settlement of organics at this depth. It's maybe gotten a little bit slower than we thought, but we've been monitoring it from the beginning with both settlement plates and with piezometers, which are measuring the pore water pressure of the soil. And the pore water pressure hasn't been releasing or dissipating quite as fast as we thought it would. So we kind of knew that coming up to this point, but thought that the settlement had appeared to be slowing a little bit, so we thought maybe we'd be ready to pull it off this fall, but we're recommending that it stay on until the spring, just I think for the city's best interest.
Council, additional questions?
What if it doesn't slow down? What if it continues? What's plan B?
I don't see that happening, honestly. With the amount of surcharge we have on there, 7 feet is pretty significant. Mm-hmm. Once all that gets removed, if it were to sit another 6 months, I'm confident we're going to have a good road. I see it similar as to people who have lived in Victoria for a while, Highway 5 on the east side of town, how that was for a long time. It's a very similar situation. That was a road crossing a swamp. And for years it was repaired until finally the state came in, and they did a kind of a similar deal, but they put lightweight fill in, which is essentially the same as doing a surcharge.
I guess I thought that one had actually taken a different course. The initial plan was to surcharge it, but that eventually it ended up being sort of a floating bridge kind of construction, and
yeah. They have
sort of seemed to recognize that the problem may not go away, and I'm looking at this thinking, is this problem going to go away?
And it's going to forever settle. There's no way you can stop it from settling because we're building over a swamp. But what we're trying to do is to minimize that to a point where you're not going to see a change in performance of the road. if we have minor settlements of, less than an inch or maybe even an inch or two, you're not going to see that. We're trying to avoid, the 3 to 4 inch settlements that could potentially happen if we take the surcharge off now, and that would surely cause some maintenance.
So if the council approves this, this would still be monitored for the next 6 months?
Yeah, we're monitoring it throughout the winter, measuring the surcharge, the settlement plates every 2 weeks, as well as the piezometers, and we'd keep updating these graphs.
Got it. Thanks. Council?
This may be a silly question, but during the winter, I'm assuming the process slows down and to a point where
Doesn't affect it at all, because we're dealing with stuff that's way below the ground that
Okay.
isn't affected by frost.
Can we get some readouts through the course of the winter rather than wait till 6 more months pass? And then
Certainly.
get a-
They report to me probably monthly, so we could include that in a correspondence update.
I guess I would make that request if that's, if everyone agrees. And then I guess the other question that I had was that we've kind of got a bit of a layering of traffic planning and other developments that we were counting on this section of road to both eliminate some existing concerns as well as prevent them from getting worse. So I guess, where does that put us?
When this development was approved, Lake Wasserman Woods, they all have slightly similar names. The Meadows at Lake Wasserman? Okay, sorry. They are just starting utility work, so we aren't anticipating any major home construction occurring in this neighborhood. I do think it's important, though, that if we provide this time extension, that we stick to it. I think it'll be a real challenge to go through a whole another construction season for these folks without this connection in. So we're going to want to be watching the clock and staying in contact with Lennar and making sure that when road restrictions come off, they are mobilized and ready to go so we can get this thing open and in as soon as possible. Marsh Lake Road, that project is hopefully going to get picked up back up here soon. It sounds like the county is getting close to finalizing the updated traffic projections that we were waiting for. The last information I heard is it sounded like we'd probably get something later this month that would allow us to pick Marsh Lake Road preliminary design back up and get moving on getting that thing finalized for construction. Certainly, though, with approval of this extension, we'll want to send out notification through our Marsh Lake Road distribution list and our other contacts that we have in this neighborhood to let them know what the updated schedule is so that they have that information.
Sounds like we've got, we're going to have bias built into our decision-making in the spring. Because if there's any ambiguity or wiggle room, we're going to err on the side of building the road. That's kind of what I'm hearing. So that's a little bit dangerous.
There certainly is risk, and I think providing updates periodically to the council on what that settlement is makes a lot of sense, so we all know what we're getting ourselves into come spring.
Is there a way to escrow any funds from the developer to mitigate the risk further in the event that we have to push forward when it's kind of suboptimal?
I certainly don't want to speak for the developer, but if their geotechnical engineer is recommending holding off now or recommending holding off later, and the city requires them to build the road against the recommendation of their geotechnical engineer, I expect they'll be wanting their warranty waived if we're forcing them to do something outside of what's recommended by their professional.
Thank you.
Okay, council, any further comments? Can I get a motion?
I'll make the motion to direct the city engineer to authorize a time extension for construction of Lakeside Drive as requested in accordance with the development agreement for Lake Town 9th edition.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, passed unanimously. Thanks for your time. The next item, new business. Aaron? This is the Creamery Building addition, site plan and building materials, parking CUP.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mayor and council, tonight we do have two requests that I'm going to be talking about simultaneously related to the Creamery redevelopment project. So as the mayor just said, the two actions we'll be discussing tonight are the building materials and site plan, as well as a conditional use permit related to parking. A little bit of development history about the site. In 2008, a project on the site came before the city council and received all approvals. At that time, the project included demolition of the existing building and construction of two new buildings, one being a mixed-use space, the other a four-story condo building. But due to market conditions, the applicant chose not to move forward at that time. The Creamery site was then occupied by Enke Brewing from 2013 to 2016, before their move to HEI near Highway 5. And since Enke's move, the building has been vacant. The City Council did review a co-op senior housing project on the site in 2016. If you remember, that was a 60-unit condo building. So the project tonight before the City Council maintains the existing Creamery building on the site and is a mixed-use building to include a main-level restaurant with office space on the second level. I think we're all pretty familiar with the site, but the slides on the screen show the existing conditions. The proposed project tonight includes an addition of roughly 4,300 square feet to the existing roughly 6,000 square foot building. The applicant has mentioned that the restaurant will be a sit-down, full-service restaurant with a large banquet space, and the office space on the second floor will be reuse of existing conditions. Working through some of the planning details of the project, the site is zoned within our central business district, and the proposed use meets all setbacks and impervious surface requirements. And the project also meets objectives within the comprehensive plan for the downtown. So those objectives met by this project include establishing an urban downtown as an economically sound, culturally vibrant, and visually attractive local and regional destination. It develops the central business district using land uses that are multi-purpose, mixed use, and compatible with urban development. And it helps develop attractive architectural design that's outlined in the downtown design standards. Information related to this project in the downtown master plan. The downtown is envisioned as a place to work, play, and shop first and foremost. An additional objective is to build on the strong character for downtown and establish a destination that provides a sense of place, and the land use and zoning strategies that facilitate a balanced, mixed land use that maximizes shared parking opportunities. Something else to note is information from the 2015 community survey. So 90% of people who responded placed high or medium priority on increasing downtown commercial development. And in the open-ended response to how would you address the biggest challenge facing Victoria, you'll see on the screen several people who replied to the survey did mention adding additional restaurants in the downtown core. Moving into some of the proposed site conditions. So the Creamery site is here. The existing building is the darker brown. The new expansion is kind of the red rust color. So the proposed project has an addition on the east, south, and west side of the project. And the site plan, this is a good look of where the property sits in relation to property lines and where the building will be sited. Stormwater management is planned to be routed to connect with the overall regional storm management system to the north to connect with the downtown system. And the additional space of impervious surface will include roof drains that will connect to the storm sewer along Tower Boulevard. A formal sidewalk will be added along with this project along the southern portion of the property that will connect the southeast to the southwest corner with a full sidewalk here. And if you can picture yourself standing on Tower Boulevard with School of the Wise behind you, you'll think that the grade of the building is actually lower than the sidewalk. So the proposed sidewalk in this project will be a continuous tapered and tiered staircase, similar to what's in front of the Main Street building, so to get you down to the grade of the front door. The Planning Commission has had really thoughtful discussion about this project. It came before them first at the September 19th meeting, and they had some really specific questions for the applicant. They chose to table the project at that first meeting and asked the applicant to come back at the October 3rd meeting. At the October 3rd meeting, this project was recommended on a 6-0 vote by the Planning Commission. So a few changes made by the Planning Commission was relocation of accessible parking closer to the door of the new restaurant, which is here, so moving accessible parking that is closer to the door. A second revision made by the Planning Commission and applicant was a revision to the trash enclosure to make it more fluid with the project. I have a better elevation coming, but this is just the first round of the project versus the second, left and right. So you'll see the driveway is drastically decreased on the right. And the third, the Planning Commission had concerns about semi-truck parking on Victoria Drive for an extended period of time, performing deliveries throughout the day. So the applicant has worked with the delivery team that will be making deliveries to the restaurant. The truck will actually be stationed behind Noble Lion in the parking lot, and delivery will be made via foot to avoid having a semi parked on one of the main thoroughfares of downtown. Moving into the elevations, which are always, I think, the most fun to look at. Looking at the building materials of the project, the image on the screen shows the elevation if you're standing on Tower Boulevard with the clock tower building behind you. The applicant has provided building materials, which I'll pass down now. There's brick, as well as a color sample for the project. So the primary building materials include brick and glazing, as well as period lighting to continue the historical look of the site. Next, this is the east side elevation if you're standing on the alley, which was recently renamed to Randy's Way. The north side of the project if you were on Steger Lake Lane. And west if you were standing on Victoria Drive. The proposed materials do meet provisions from the Central Business District within the City Code, and they also mirror what's existing on the property, so it'll be a good blend of existing conditions as well as adding to the addition. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Is that a patio on the second floor there? Is that on top of the addition?
Not contemplated as part of the project.
That's just decorative then, what we're looking at?
At this time, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. This is a good look at the trash enclosure that the Planning Commission worked through. So on the left, you'll see what was proposed at the September 19th meeting and what came back on the October 3rd meeting. It was important to the Commission to have the facade of the building on a prominent downtown street be fluid to make it look like it's not an area where trash is stored, but actually incorporated in the building. So this was good work by the Planning Commission and the applicant working together to make the project something that the Planning Commission could support. Okay, so that was the information about the site plan and building materials. So now we're going to move into information about parking. So the project is included as part of the downtown shared parking area, and the property has access to a level of shared parking that was created when the city undertook 2 phases of downtown street utility and parking improvements. During that project, the creamery, the property that the creamery sits on was actually significantly larger, but the city acquired property for public parking. So the areas here and along the north, east, and the south chunk of the property were acquired by the city, making the site significantly smaller, but providing public parking. So shared parking is kind of a tricky thing. It's a big idea that needs to be thought of as a system, and the total is the number of aggregate spaces in the downtown. The shared parking ordinance was put in place to facilitate getting businesses within the downtown, and as you know, parking spaces are not assigned to specific buildings. So businesses don't have spaces right in front of them that say this business parking only. The ordinance also does not speak to parking proximity. It just speaks to the number of spaces. So in some cases, patrons are expected to walk a little bit just based on the shared parking. So there are a few exceptions, but largely businesses downtown use public parking for 100% of their patron parking. So each site in 2008 was allocated a number of base development sites. So the creamery was given access to 34 of the base development sites. So that's what they have to develop. Based on the information in the city code with the uses and the size of the uses for this project, the site does require 38 parking spaces, so there is a 4-space deficit which triggered the need for the conditional use permit. So that's why we're working through this process as well. So this shows the total downtown parking spots, the creamery with the 34 that are allocated to the site, and the 38 that the project does require.
Wait, can you go back a second?
Sure.
Spaces for use, only 9 for a restaurant?
Per 1,000.
Per 1,000 square feet.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure. So a little bit more about the existing conditions. The 360 total number is the updated number, so 265 of public on-street parking spaces, 95 private, with a total of 360 total parking spaces allowed downtown. The council has already discussed 2 projects that we are contemplating at this time. So the Steger Lake Lane project, which would provide 68 additional spaces moving down towards Highway 5 from City Hall, and the one-way conversion of Steger Lake Lane, which conservatively would provide 9 to 13 parking spaces. So in total, those 2 projects conservatively will provide 77 additional parking spaces, bringing our grand total of parking in downtown to 437 spaces. Something to note that those 2 projects alone will increase our public parking by 29%.
Aaron, I don't see in these numbers reference to the former and future public parking over here. So
Sure.
there was, I believe, 39 spaces before, and I think we gained something like 18 or 19 spaces that within the next, I think it's just a couple months, is that correct?
Correct.
Should be re-available. Is that in addition to this here?
Nope, that's included in that number.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So a question about what the existing conditions look like throughout the downtown. What does shared parking mean? What does it look like on any given day? Our shared parking ordinance does not speak to the peak times that businesses are open. So if you think about a business like a coffee shop, busy in the morning, quiets down in the evening, where a restaurant, quiet in the morning, picks up in the evening. So something to think about is a lot of the businesses in downtown peak differently, which allows for an increase of parking throughout the downtown. In a brief parking analysis, of the 360 total spaces, we did an evaluation of what the businesses require downtown today based on the 50% reduction. The total businesses, the total spaces of the businesses that currently exist, including the creamery project, is 340 spaces, 341 since we need to round up to that 0.9 to a full parking spot. So the difference of available versus demand, there are 19 parking spaces currently that are unrealized by the businesses that exist in downtown today.
The 340, is that the 50% or is that?
Correct, that's 50%. The creamery project, the 38 spaces required, is included in that number. So our city ordinance also states that if an applicant is short on parking, they do have the opportunity to pay into a parking fund in an amount equal to construction of each space that they're not proposing to provide. So the value of the 4 spaces that the creamery is short is $5,000 each, or $20,000 total. The applicant has indicated that this is the preferred route, and the payment that could be taken in from this project could be used for the 2 parking spaces that I mentioned earlier, so the one-way conversion and parking down Steger Lake Lane. The Planning Commission did hold the required public hearing at the October 3rd meeting for the project for the conditional use permit. Notice was mailed to property owners within 350 feet of the property. We had 1 business owner at the meeting, but no one came forward at that time with comments or concerns related to the conditional use permit. And again, the project was recommended on a 6-0 vote at the most recent Planning Commission meeting. So moving into a little bit of information about the resolution, the condition for the conditional use permit would be that the applicant shall pay the $20,000, the equivalent of $5,000 per parking space, to the downtown parking fund to satisfy the deficit of the 4 parking spaces. And conditions related to the site plan and building material, since we are looking for 2 actions tonight, include a final site plan approved by the city engineer, the applicant having those 2 accessible parking spots near the door of the restaurant, the Rose Street parking lot for delivery, a sidewalk easement across the southern portion of the property, and building and sign permits being applied for prior to any work being done on the property. So in review, the discussion by the council tonight should include the site plan, building materials, and the conditional use permit. So 2 actions related to the creamery redevelopment site. As I stated, the proposed project does meet goals and objectives as outlined within the comprehensive plan, the downtown master plan, and does tick some of the boxes from the 2015 citizen survey. The applicant is in the room tonight and likely has a lot more historical knowledge about the site and is open to any questions or comments. Otherwise, at that time, I'll open it up for questions, comments, and discussion.
Council? Well, I'll start then. I seem to recall hearing before that the price per stall for parking cost more than $5,000. And I'm not sure if I have that right. Could you elaborate on that? Is $5,000 really the right price for a single stall?
Sure, so I might defer some of the information to Kara. It depends on the type of parking you're providing. So an on-street spot where no additional right-of-way is required can range anywhere from $3,000, where a spot in a parking ramp, obviously the price significantly increases. We estimate that an on-street parking spot can range anywhere from $3,000 to $8,000. So $5,000 was essentially the median of that number.
How does this compare to other projects approved by the council?
Kara, could you speak to that?
Mayor, I don't believe that a previous project has paid into the parking fund. You alluded earlier to the building to the west of us that was approved, and alternate arrangements were made in terms of Bayfront Park. I don't believe that a previous project has paid into the parking. Also, if your question is just about is the $5,000 the right amount, that's certainly a discussion that would be up to the council, but that $5,000, I believe, is established in our ordinance and would not be subject to debate at this time.
All right, that's the question, because I thought there was a different price when the land swap was done for this building, and that's back in 2013, so I don't know if that's the only time that happened, and I'm trying to understand if, in fact, was it $5,000 at that time also, but I think you answered at least part of the question. This is specified in the ordinance that it's $5,000 per spot?
Is that correct, Erin?
I believe so, yes.
All right, can we go back to the slide that showed the 9 spots per 1,000 square feet for the restaurant? What's the total square footage here? 3,500, so that'd be 27, and for sake of argument, say 5 more. That's 32 parking spots?
31.5.
So it's here.
Okay. 100 seats. In a previous, when I lived back east, I had a restaurant. In the restaurant business, you want turnover on seats. And typically in a meal, you'd want 2, which means you want each seat occupied twice for dinner, lunch, whatever the case may be. Is 35, is basically 32 spots, is that going to be enough if this restaurant fills up? It seems to be, to me, to be on the short side, because if you have 100 seats, how many cars is that?
Yeah. If I could just interject, Erin, just to clarify that, again, that's an appropriate discussion for the council to have, but this is what's currently called for in ordinance. So as we discuss this specific proposal, we have to work within the confines of the current ordinance. But if the council wants to talk about whether that's the right number in relation to a future shared parking ordinance, that would be appropriate. And I was able to confirm quickly that the $5,000 per stall is the same amount that applied to the land swap.
All right, so what you're telling me is this council has no choice on this, that's the right number?
So today it's based on square footage and usage. We don't speak to tables in our ordinance, so it wouldn't be something that we could arbitrarily say tonight based on that. We'll have to go with square footage and use since it's what our ordinance states.
So in essence, I'm correct in saying that we're locked into this, we don't have a choice?
Correct. We wouldn't be able to make a revision to that at this time.
All the more reason to have a workshop on parking, as was mentioned earlier in this meeting. All right, that's all the questions I have. Council, any other questions?
Yeah, certainly. Obviously, parking is going to be a challenge. That's no secret to anybody. But as just mentioned, there isn't a lot we can do about that issue right now. So moving on to other issues, I did watch the Park and Rec, or not the Park and Rec, but the Planning Commission, and they did really good work on that, getting that trash issue squared away, it's a much better project with that revision. So I want to just commend everybody on that, Planning Commission and the developer as well. And then the parking for the handicap, another good work that the Planning Commission did. Very good work. The overall concept or idea of a restaurant incorporating the creamery, I love it. I think it's wonderful that we're saving that building and making it part of our downtown. It's going to be. I think it's an exciting project, and so looking forward to it.
Council, go ahead.
Additional, I was here with the and saw the 2008 proposal. I saw the 2015 proposal for the Creamery building. This proposal is by far the classiest and the nicest. It should really go well with the rest of the downtown area. So I really like the concept. The parking, I think, is problematic, but it's solvable. And we're working on it, and we just have to keep working on it constantly. And I think we can make it work. I think the Planning Commission did an outstanding job of doing all the homework for us. So I'm really gratified to see that. I think the changes that were made were good ones. And the parking we've discussed, I've had discussions with Aaron. And the question of number of tables versus the 38 spots was paramount in my thinking, but I think it works. Those new parking spots along Steger Lake Lane, going to the east, will help this tremendously. If people are just willing to walk a block or two, this will work. So I see this as a really good project.
Council, any other further comments?
Just to echo the previous comments. I'm excited to see this project come to downtown Victoria, and compliment the owner and the Planning Commission for working together on this. Thank you.
I'll just add to that it's a challenge, especially when it's redevelopment and it's an interesting architectural building, but yet one that's, as I understand, deficient in a number of ways. And so, the sentiment about keeping our community small and charming is one that many of us share and hear a lot, but turning that into a reality is not always that easy, and it's not very inexpensive. So, again, I want to echo my compliments to the developer, the building owner, and the Planning Commission for finding a way to keep that charming character in Victoria and turn this into something that will be a really nice centerpiece in a great location. So, thank you.
If there's no further comments, can we get the first resolution up on the screen, please?
Sure. So again, it's two motions related to the project. First is approval of the conditional use permit. Second is the site plan and building materials.
I move we approve the conditional use permit for parking related to the approval. Excuse me, I'm reading it twice. I move we approve the resolution related to the approval of the conditional use permit for parking for this project.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? That passes unanimously. A second motion?
I move we approve the site plan and building materials. We make a motion to approve the resolution related to the approval of the building materials and the site plan for Creamery redevelopment.
Is there a second? I heard a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes unanimously. All right, thanks, Aaron.
Mayor, if I could just comment real quick before you move on. I will make sure that we get a parking workshop scheduled. We've had some dialogue as staff with the VBA and appreciate them being here tonight. Just want to reiterate that we are working on two projects that would increase parking by almost 30% in the downtown if they were built. And as staff, and with the VBA, we've been brainstorming some other ideas that could make proximity of parking, which I think is the primary concern. And so, obviously, we'll talk about it at a future date, but while we have a little bit of spotlight on it, I just want the council to be aware that
unless
we're
the
all taking that seriously.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Unless the council objects, I'd like to try to do this in January, specifically because we have the workshop coming up for the comprehensive plan in October. Then we have a budget workshop in November. I'm not opposed to trying to do it in December, but just trying to fill it in as far as timing. So, council, any thoughts? Do you want to try to do it in December, January? Is there any project coming up where this could potentially be affected, or could we wait till December or January?
I'm not aware of any pending applications for development or redevelopment in the downtown. I don't think that would be an issue.
All right, council, thoughts on timing for the workshop?
Go ahead, Jim.
Just to say sooner rather than later.
Sooner the better.
Are we contemplating a strategic planning session typically after the first of the year in years past? Are we contemplating that? Because this would certainly play into that.
Yeah, we are in the preliminary budget that the council adopted. We are planning to do a strategic planning session in 2018.
So would you see it as beneficial to do the parking before then or as after that?
You know, I would say downtown parking has been a priority of this council and previous councils, and I would be surprised if it wasn't carried forward into a future strategic plan. So I would expect it to be included in there and a point of discussion at that kind of a session. And I think you could probably do it either way.
So it sounds like, can the council agree to schedule that in December, since we have workshops and the others? Is December fine?
Probably, yes.
So let's shoot for a date in December. And just since we're on the subject, history, typically the second meeting of the month in December is usually not held because of vacations and other things. I can't remember, is that on the schedule this year?
You know, the second meeting in December is actually Christmas, which we are legally not able to meet on, even if we wanted to, which I'm sure we might want to. So the meetings in December are like December 11th and December 18th. And so, you know, sometimes we don't have that second meeting if we've passed our budget and we're through, and sometimes we've got too much going on. But I typically am able to manage the schedule. I don't need that level of direction at this point.
Okay, super.
I just thought there were people watching that are interested in this issue, and I didn't want to move on without highlighting that they were heard and that we have plans to work on this.
All right, super. So let's try to get something for December then where it makes sense. Any other comments?
Yeah,
go ahead.
One more question, and just now that this is passed, what's the timing on this project in terms of going forward?
Mary, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you for that vote of approval. I appreciate it.
Excuse me,
Council
just for the record, name and address, please.
Mary Mavison. I'm the owner of the Victoria Creamery, 7929 Victoria Drive.
Thank you.
We will be moving forward and seeing if we can get something done this winter, but we're kind of right at the crux. So it's either going to be a winter project or a spring project. And just because you're going to have a meeting on the shared parking, I do want to share with you that spot checking, I think, is very important. These were just random since the VRBO had brought it up to me. I just wanted to share with you. They shared this with me on Friday. So Friday, I physically went and counted your parking spots that were empty at 5 o'clock, and I photographed everything. You had over 100 empty spots, and that was at 5 o'clock. I came back at 7:40, and you had over 100 empty spots. On Saturday at 3 o'clock, you had over 101 empty spots. On Saturday at 8, you had 95 empty spots. On Sunday, it was quite wide open. On Monday, today, at 1 o'clock, you had 89 empty spots. And on Monday at 6 p.m. before this meeting, you had 150 empty spots. And I never went to the Floyd's Old City Hall parking lot to count those. So just wanted to let you know that there are different peak times in parking. So
all right,
good to
thank
know.
you.
Thank you.
Next item, Kara?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This item in your agenda relates to 6355 Bay Cliff Drive, and it is on the council agenda for discussion. The City Council received a letter from the property owner at 6355 6355 Bay Cliff Drive. I believe she is in attendance tonight, waiting patiently for this agenda item to come up. Included in your packet was the letter provided by the resident, who also, I believe, shared that directly with all the city council members. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here with the history, but do want to highlight a number of matters relating to this issue. So, again, the property is located up in the Bay Cliff neighborhood at 6355. In the 2008-2009 time period, the city did reconstruct all the streets in that neighborhood. I'm actually going to go to an aerial. I like to point. So the streets were reconstructed at that time, including Bay Cliff Drive, Maple Ridge. This is actually Orchid. All of these streets in this area. The house that we're discussing tonight is 6355. This portion of Bay Cliff is private. So as we go west of Orchid, that's not a city street. But the street project included all these roads up in this area. And at the time of reconstructing the streets, we did increase the width of the streets to some degree. They were, I want to say, 18 to 19 feet wide, and we did widen them to 24 feet. And historically, there wasn't curb and gutter up in that neighborhood, so we did install concrete curb and gutter and storm sewer. Not long after, and I'm sure Mrs. Carlson probably has more of this history, but not long after, the person who owned the property at the time, who was Terry's mother-in-law, had reached out to the city with concerns about flooding on the property, and was of the perspective that the flooding was becoming problematic due to the street project. So at the time, city staff reviewed those concerns, and while we did increase the street width and added curb and gutter, we felt that the amount of change was fairly insignificant compared to the overall drainage area that's drained into their property. So we declined to make any changes at that time. In 2014, then, the current property owner reached out to the city again, requesting that the city participate in improvements on their property. So they were contemplating making a number of improvements to their property, and were requesting that the city participate in that project. And again, we're expressing concern that it was the street project that was causing the flooding on their property. So I elected at that time to retain the services of a third-party engineer to just complete a water resources assessment of the situation. The results of that assessment from 2014 are included in your packet. There are kind of two key conclusions that he had reached, and one was that the street project resulted in a 0.8% increase in impervious surface and a 1.8% increase in volume of water draining to the property. So at the time, the information that was being provided to us from the property owner was they were looking at improvements on their property of about $167,000. And I included that document in the packet tonight. And given the fact that I had a study saying that there was only a 1.8% increase in volume or a 0.8% change in impervious surface, I just couldn't come up with justification for the city council that would recommend that the city participate in $167,000 worth of improvements on private property. These are situations that come up not infrequently, where flooding occurs on private property, and the city is approached about anything from fixing a storm sewer system that is maintained by the city to installing new storm sewer systems on private property. In 2014, it came up a lot. We had a list of probably a half a dozen different areas that was that high rainfall year where we had major flooding in the city, that we ended up having to work with different property owners to determine when or how the city should participate in these projects. And so Typically, one of the first things that I look at is, one, is there infrastructure in the area that the city maintains, that the city should be fixing or completing repairs to? That's fairly obviously the city's responsibility. If we have storm sewer pipe that's, falling apart, we would have to fix it. In a case like this, where we don't have any infrastructure in the area that was flooding in the low area of their backyard, then I typically take a look at how much contributing flow is coming from public right-of-way. So it's a fairly small area relative to the overall drainage area for the land area. So, and I'll show that on a future slide. Couldn't remember my order here. This was a photo, and Mrs. Carlson may have shared more photos with members of the City Council, but I have a number in my possession from 2014. This is their backyard. So during large rain events, there used to be a pond. I had been back here a number of years ago, and it was really quite lovely. This was on the garden tour, if anybody ever had the opportunity to go on the city garden tour. Very well manicured and nicely maintained, and in then the more recent history, after the street project and years prior, this was the experience that they were describing to me. These pictures were taken after that flooding in 2014, showing the amount of water in the area. So this is an aerial from 2014, prior to the property owner completing work on their property. This right here is this ponding area that was in the back of their yard. And so drainage from a fairly large 3+ acre area drains down to this low area in their backyard, which is privately maintained. There isn't any storm drainage easements over it or anything of that nature. The photograph on the right is a more recent aerial showing their property after they completed the improvements that they completed between 2014 and 15. So at this time, as noted, we obtained in 2014 an outside engineering assessment to determine whether what level of change we made as a result of the street project. At the time of 2014, when the property owner was contemplating improvements, I advised them that I couldn't make a recommendation to City Council to participate in funding $167,000 of projects. The property owner elected to go ahead and complete improvements to their property sometime between 2014 and 2015. We had more discussions with the property owner in 2016. Lori attended a meeting with myself and the property owner and their attorney. And then now here we are in 2017 with the latest letter of demand. So the point being, this has been ongoing for quite some time and certainly is worthy of discussion by the City Council. In the latest letter, the property owner, and certainly she can speak to that, is requesting that the City Council agree to essentially reimburse them for some of the improvements that were completed on the property. And that's where we sit today. So I imagine you have questions perhaps for me or the property owner or the city manager, and we would be happy to answer them as best as we can.
The council, if there's no objections, I'd like Mrs. Carlson to give her a few minutes to address and provide her point of view. Any objections?
No.
No. Mrs. Carlson, just for the record, if you will, name and address, please.
Thank you. Terry Carlson, 6355 Bay Cliff Drive in Victoria. What Kara said was fairly accurate. The one thing that she didn't tell you was that in 2010, approximately, when they were completing the project, the street project with curb and gutter on the Bay Cliff and Orchid and all of the roads, they had in the original plans put a storm sewer down at the west end of Bay Cliff. And they had assessed each of the residents $16,000 to do the curb and gutter and storm sewer project, which we paid outright. At that time, they had, I guess, overrun their budget, And she came to us, called us, and asked us if it would be possible, instead of putting a storm sewer down at that end, which would have been cost prohibitive, to instead put in a sluice which would direct the storm water onto our property. And they would put in a riprap, basically a little trail, over to a catch basin, about a 30-inch catch basin. Up until that time, we had not had problems. We had done all of this landscaping down below and hadn't had any real problems with rain. And so we said, all right, she assured us there would not be a problem with the water because they hadn't done any dramatic increases. And so we went ahead and allowed that to happen, which essentially made our property the storm sewer for that end of the street. And at that point, when the project was completed and the sluice was put in and the catch basin, that's when we began to have all of the problems. I did, because it was suggested to me by Lori and Kara, that I hire our own civil engineer to come out and take a look at the situation, the property. I was unable to find one simply because there isn't a civil engineer that wants to take on that smaller project and who also wants to go up against a city. That's what I was told. Kara did give me a list of them. I went through the list. One of the civil engineers told me to write a letter of demand to the city council and to the mayor. And so that is the end what I did. We did not improve the property. We had to completely take out all of the landscaping that was in the lower level. What we did do is developed basically a ditch that is rubber lined and it has rock in it, and it goes from the northwest corner of our property all the way through to the southeast corner of our property, so that the water then is dumped into a holding pond that was already there by Highway 7, which is where the water should be going. So basically what we've done is we've run a storm sewer right across our property to handle all of the water. It still doesn't handle all of the water. We're still working through it. I have the recent rainfall that we had last Monday, a week ago. I was out taking a video, and I can show you the amount of water that comes through the culverts that we have installed, if you would like to see it.
Thank you. Council, questions for Ms. Carlson? If not,
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Is there a storm sewer protecting your property at the moment?
No.
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 Nothing.
No. Us. We are the storm sewer. There is farther down the street, but when they redid the roads and widened them and put in the curb and gutter, they also raised the crest of Orchid Street and Bay Cliff so that it would have conveniently, if a storm sewer was there, it would work excellently because there's a lot of water that comes down. We had to redo the driveway because it was straight with Orchid Street. It was just a chute. And the water that would come down would absolutely billow over the driveway, and it was ruining, it was awful. So we curved the driveway around and made it hard surface, and we've done a lot of landscaping. We're only coming to you for the part that is directing the water directly from the street across our property to the holding pond. The rest of the repairs, tearing apart all of our landscaping, redoing all of those things, we're not asking you to pay for that.
If I may interject, I'm Chandler Carlson, I'm the husband. Prior to all this happening, and this is my late parents' house we've inherited, there was never any of these kind of problems. Now, oddly enough, I've never understood why. I guess they wanted to have sort of a rustic look. They had a Class 5 driveway, forever and ever. And that was all good until, again, these improvements, quote unquote, were made. And you've been out. If you stand at the top of our driveway, you see all three of these streets funneling right into our area. With a Class 5 driveway, that was starting to wash out. And so we decided, okay, we're going to have to spend the money and get it paved. The unintended consequences of that is now that just speeds the water up, so it hits that, runs down the driveway. Now we have boulder walls that hold that driveway up. The water's going across that, undercutting the boulder wide driveway, and then washing out a pathway So now we have to go back and do more improvements. So this is just an ongoing situation that we had never intended to encounter, and I'm sure nobody ever else, decided it would be like this, but it has been like this. And so it's, as I say, improvements. It's not been so much improvements as defensive measures, trying to keep the property from being ruined, and that's kind of the consequence because we hired a hydrologist, and we've done a lot of things trying to figure out how do we defend ourselves in this situation, because it's, in effect, it damages our property, unintended consequences as such, because it's a hassle. But we have a lot of video from the last 2 years where we've had these big rainfalls, and we run out there with our cell phones and the raincoats on. It's outlandish how it comes down, from the top of from up at the street. And so, I mean, we've got visual evidence of it all.
The hydrologist report did say that there were a couple of things that were not done in the plan that was originally figured out for the streets, and that has contributed to the problem. So I guess the city, in saving money at one point, has created a lot of expense on our part now.
So, if I may, I did go out and meet with you last Friday and looked at it, because getting a written report without putting eyes on it, it's hard to visualize, if you will. And in here, in the packet that you gave me, that I assume is part of the council packet, though I didn't verify that. Lori, I'll give this to you guys afterwards.
I gave you other things that I hadn't sent along.
This picture that shows the driveway with the Class 5 with the ruts through it, did that happen after the city had done all of the road work, or is this before?
No, that's after all the road work. That's when we didn't have problems like that before.
Okay, and you had mentioned to me, and by the way, just for the record, I'm not an expert here. What I want to know is make sure that we have access to all of the information. And I'm not saying the city's responsible for it, nor am I saying the city doesn't have some culpability here. What I'm saying is I don't know, and we need some experts to look at this, at least from my perspective. But you did mention to me that you said that in the original plans, the city was supposed to do some things, and I can't remember exactly what it was.
In the hydrologist report, and I think it said it's this one, the nuisance water issues. He had come to the city and had gotten the plans, and he has several plans. He had, let's see, I'm going to show you.
I think
he got this one from the city. And in that, he does talk about things that were not put in, something about a valley gutter. I'll have to look here too.
Undersized curb cut, faulty catch basin.
so. Kara, I don't want to put you on the spot here.
She's seen this. I've sent this to Kara.
Was there things that were in the original plans that the city ended up not doing?
I don't know that I have the attachments that you have in your hand there. That went with that.
Yeah, the hydrologist report.
Yeah, I believe I have his text, but I didn't have the attachments in my file, so I want to take.
Thought we sent that to you.
I just didn't have it in my file
It
when I
was
was
in
reviewing it this
2015.
week.
It could have been.
So I would rather look at the specific things that he's referencing before I speak to that.
Yeah, there's a missing valley gutter, he says. Honestly, I don't know what that is.
So I, of course, was here in 2008 and participated in the development of those plans. I don't recall there being anything specifically removed from the project, but I'd like to review the materials that he was referencing before I speak to that.
You do remember meeting with us, though, to talk
Yes.
about not putting the storm sewer in and instead putting in the sluice.
I don't think, my recollection, and I want to go back to my records from then, is I don't think we ever actually proposed. So this is, the storm sewer that's in the neighborhood is located in this location. And so when we were working on the design phase of the project, we would have been deciding whether we would extend this storm sewer up to this location or look at putting in a concrete curb discharge to allow the water to drain this way. So in the pre-existing condition, there wasn't curb in place, so water would just flow across the road and into their yard.
Well, and all the roads, it just went off.
Yeah, there
It's now
wasn't-
being channeled with the
there
current
wasn't
government.
ditches, there was
Dissipate
just.
into everybody's yard, so.
So it certainly would have an opportunity to infiltrate in some of those areas, or wash down the driveway if it ever got high enough. But, so I do recall during the design phase likely deciding whether we were gonna run the storm sewer up through here. Part of the challenge with running a storm sewer in that location is there's an existing sanitary line that runs through the street. So, in order to have extended that storm sewer, we would have likely had to reroute the whole sanitary sewer system or do a fair amount of jumping around with the storm sewer. But I'd have to go back to those records to remember the decision tree, but certainly did meet with them. They did, they were comfortable with what we were proposing here on the basis of the information that I was providing to them at that time. But notably, I did hear from them after the project was complete that from their perspective, conditions got worse. I'm not in a position to speak to what conditions were like before we did the street project because I was never on their property. The only thing that I have available is to look at how the conditions changed, and on that basis, I just couldn't come up with a justification for spending, what's arguably 50% of your annual stormwater budget
Right.
on flooding on one property. So certainly, though, welcome the discussion with the city council on how to resolve the matter.
So I have just two final thoughts. I'd like you to be able to have a chance to see the various comments from her hydrologist, right? And I want to make sure before the council's asked to make a decision that we have all of the facts and everybody's point of view. And secondly, I want to reemphasize, I'm not saying the city has liability here, nor do I say that the city is scot-free. But once we have a chance to look at all of those documents, we get all of the hydrologist reports, the independents, and we have a chance to kind of look at that, I think that will enable us to make a more informed decision as far as whether or not there's some responsibility on the city's part or wherever that line is. The other thing, though, is you mentioned earlier that you were not asking for landscaping and everything else. You were asking just for what I believe you said the channel, right? Just for in the back of my head, do you know what that cost is to put that channel in?
I gave that to you. I did an itemized list, and that's what I sent to the city along with the letter of demand. It was $90,000.
Okay. So that is in here in the packet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it's
everybody
broken down into a number of different elements. Because
Yes.
I went through and I was going to have the same question.
there it
I was
is.
going to try and add up the
Yep.
bits and pieces and make sure I understood.
Yeah, the
which
total
ones.
project, like I said, was over $175,000 for all the landscaping. Now, understanding that the landscaping meant that we had to tear apart and reallocate and shore up things that were being damaged by water. So, I mean, I could include that it certainly was part of the whole project. At this point, we're just trying to stay ahead of the game on this a little bit. We're continually having to rework things because the water continues to come.
So is it still not?
No, it's not done. It's still. And
No,
then-
as I was mentioning, now that we paved the driveway, now the water that comes in there that was cutting a rivulet into the class 5, comes down the driveway, it builds up speed. The driveway's held up by a boulder wall. It hits that, now it's splashing over that and starting to undercut that, and then it washes out pathways below before, so it's taken a shortcut. Like water tends to want to find the path of least resistance. And it just, goes and goes, and every time we think we've, plugged the dike, something else pops open. And that's why some of the numbers are continuing over numerous years, because, as I say, once we figure it out, okay, we've got this figured out now. And then right up until we get the next big rainstorm.
Well, we had to
and
extend
then we're out
the
there
stream
going, "Oh, for crying
because
out
it was
loud."
washing out, other areas. And then the problem is that when it washes out, it also, the silt fills in the pathway. So at that point, you have to, push it back so that you have a clear path for the water to run, so it continues to go down the channel the way it should. and goes to the holding pond by Highway 7.
So, yeah, we've had to widen it and deepen it and do all sorts of things trying to alleviate it. And as I say, we do one thing and then something else pops up. So.
And it's your contention that this all started after the curb and gutter, after the city put in the curb and gutter?
Absolutely, because there's a lot of hard surface. I mean, that means that there's another house that's across the street, all of their roof water that goes down their driveway, then is directed
It's Orchid,
down that way.
Orchid Lane comes
Orchid.
down into our driveway.
Yeah, so,
I was actually curious about that as well, if there had been any improvements on neighboring properties or, anybody else had done anything in addition to
yeah, no, that wasn't an improvement. It was just that when the curb and gutter came in, now that water, instead of just dissipating off,
Sure.
The property owners always try to direct water away from their foundations.
Yep. Yes.
And that's what they did. And they directed onto the street, and the problem is all the street water comes onto our property.
And I think the original elevation of Bay Cliff from the gates to the private area flowed just down a hill heading towards Highway 7 and all that. And then now when it's been reconstructed, as you can see, it comes down, from three angles into the front of our driveway. So prior to any changes happening, it's probably just, there it goes. It's going to go down the hill and go off to Highway 7 and no harm, no foul. But as I say, if you wouldn't have heard from us had we not had a problem.
Council?
And we also, by the way, didn't want to inundate you with pictures and videos.
Yeah, I have
we got
pictures and videos.
lots, but we just thought, well, we just have to sort of substantiate ourselves to start the discussion.
Yeah, one thing I would ask that you get a hold of Kara and Lori, and any of these documents that they don't have, please get them the copies. All right, thank you, Council.
I have some questions and comments, but I appreciate your pleasantness in this approach. It's a 7-year journey from my math, and that's more patience than most people would have or should be expected to exercise. So thank you for your approach here. Kara, when I hear 0.8% or 1.8%, and those seem like really insignificant numbers, at least in terms of additional water. But what I also hear is it now all goes in one place. And that is, to me, the biggest, instead of just going off the crest of the road and onto the shoulder and soaking in all along the way, being all gathered into one place. And I remember, I think, from the report or the letter that you sent to all of us, that it referred to both flow and velocity. And so while the flow may not be greater in total, it seems like it is being concentrated and obviously accelerated then with some of the grading. So that's kind of the part that concerns me. I know we've had extraordinary rain events in the last few years, but it seems like this isn't isolated to just the big rainfalls. It seems like is that?
We get an inch of rain, we've got water.
Okay. Mm-hmm. What's an inch of rain considered in terms of the 10-year rainfall? 40? I mean, is that a
Less than a 2-year.
Okay. So, all right. And you've got 35 years of history on the property. Is that what I read there? So, yeah, I guess that's really, I guess my last question is, if we did agree to participate in this, what's the source of funds?
It would be stormwater utility funds. So that typically is, when we're dealing with these issues, is typically where we recommend payment coming related for flooding situations. The Deer Run project is probably the other sort of relevant example that the council had some experience with coming out of 2014, where the golf course approached us about flooding. In 2014, we did a study. We came up with proposed improvements to the golf course property that we were going to head down the path of funding jointly with the golf course, where the city would pay their contributing share. The golf course elected to not have us move forward with those improvements because the impacts to the course itself were going to be greater than the perceived benefit from the project. So we did some minor maintenance to the city system, and they're continuing to see what happens in future years. That would be a process that something like this would maybe have taken. This one's unique because the property owner did elect to go forward and complete the improvements. The city didn't participate in developing those solutions, or I don't know whether a licensed engineer was hired to complete the improvements. I do know that unfortunately the work that they did undertake on the property wasn't done with any permits from Minnehaha Creek Watershed District.
That's not true. I have them right here.
According to Minnehaha Creek Watershed District.
I've got them right here.
Perfect.
They cashed our check.
Good. I asked them to search the file, and they provided me an incomplete letter that they sent to
it's like, why did I put this in my file? It's right here.
That would be helpful for me to have.
Again, thank you.
Certainly, because, should the city elect to participate, some of those things become important. But certainly we could take a look at whatever information they have that we don't have. We could take a look at percentage of land area that's draining to this area from public right-of-way. Private property is a little harder, so this is the overall drainage area. This is the break between the street becomes private going this direction. This area is public, so there's this part of Orchid, this part of Baycliff, and then the property that drains to Orchid and Baycliff that then comes down to their property.
Yep, that looks right.
But there's also, their own property itself, and then the neighboring property also all draining to the low area down here. So, there's different ways you can try to carve out what your share might,
Yeah, and I understand there's challenges in that and design challenges in any solution, and I think even the recommendations with respect to sizing of storm water systems has changed because of some of these more frequent large events. So
that's correct.
Nothing is static, I understand that. Will you be evaluating some of the work that was done as kind of part of your review to say, yeah, if we did it, this is what we would do, or how we would do it, or how it would compare?
I don't know. That's difficult to answer because we would need to understand from a technical perspective if we were going to look at sizing and designing a system to accommodate this whole drainage area. You'd want to have pretty specific information about the impervious surface. We do have updated aerials now, so that would afford us some opportunity. But if that was that level of detail of study that the council wanted undertaken, we would be going to a outside water resources engineer to conduct that work. That, how much money do you spend on that versus spending it on contributing to work they've already done is.
Would the Watershed District come in and take a look at it?
I certainly could ask them. I would imagine they'd be willing to if we asked them.
My last question or comment is, it's a journey in progress. It's not over yet. How do we kind of draw a line, and whatever we would choose to, however we would choose to respond to this, that's we've got some confidence that it's final, or that it's
Right. I think that's a good point. I think I'd like to propose that the council consider that we table this to allow Karen to get all of the data that she apparently doesn't have the full set, give her time to look through it, talk to the watershed, and then once you've had a chance to do that, maybe we come back and hopefully we'll have a complete picture and enough information to be able to make a decision at that time, because I don't want the city to pay for something that we're not responsible for, nor do I think residents should pay for something if no fault lies with the residents. So, council, should we consider tabling this or continue discussion?
We don't have enough information to make a decision.
So,
I do have a question before we table this.
Go ahead.
How many homes in Victoria on city streets, not private streets, do not have stormwater sewer protection?
So there's that. To answer that question is a bit more complicated. So all of the new neighborhoods, built in the last 20, 30 years, have stormwater ponds. So they have flood control mechanisms in place that are on primarily city-owned outlots. The older stuff are on drainage and utility easements. That's the majority of the city. When we came into these older neighborhoods and reconstructed the city streets, we weren't required by anybody to put in ponds or flood control, flood management systems. It would be cost prohibitive if you would, because you would have to start acquiring pretty significant land to go in and construct stormwater ponds in various locations. However, when we reconstructed the streets, we did include provisions for managing stormwater runoff from the street, so i.e. storm sewer pipe. So all the streets that have been redone have storm sewer pipe in them now.
But this street in front of this.
You
home
don't
does
always, if I were to show you a map with just storm sewer turned on, there are all sorts of streets that don't have actual pipes right in front of their house. The green is storm sewer pipe. So storm sewer pipe by design isn't like a sanitary sewer pipe where it's everywhere in the roadway. You only put it at low points to collect water. In this case, we made the decision to discharge it overland versus running the storm sewer up to this location. Certainly that's something we could also take another look at, is what the cost would be to run a storm sewer system and connect this back into here. It is problematic because of that sanitary sewer line, but that's certainly something else I could take a look at for the council so you could understand what those options are.
I think
and
you
what
should.
that cost might be.
Yep.
So the couple things that I think I need from Mrs. Carlson are just the attachments to that report, whatever you have from the watershed district by way of permits. And then I'll take a look at storm sewer, some additional drainage area information, and then I will request to see if Minnehaha Creek Watershed District would be willing to do an independent review of the materials and provide us some thoughts. Am I hearing what I should do next?
Yep.
Yeah, just one more comment. It sounds like this is going to be an ongoing issue, and I'm just wondering, at any point, did you look at anything short of putting in a storm sewer extension? Is there anything that can be done to mitigate this?
I think they've done a lot of things within their own property that would be reasonable for managing stormwater runoff. So it's whether we all should be participating in the cost of those improvements is the question. I've really only been on their property once since they completed the improvement, so I don't have a good gauge of, or instead of improvements, I'm going to call them prevention measures.
Remediation.
To know how effective that's been. It's probably been last summer sometime, maybe, since I was out there last.
Yeah, and even then, we've had to do other things. And again, now we have more things to do because we have more washouts. When Kara came out, when we told her we were having problems, then I asked her, well, can't you guys just send some people out to straighten this thing out? And she says, well, no, we can't have city employees on private property. I thought, rats. That means we're going to have to pay for it because it's like, come on, help us out here. We'd be happy to have you, but it's.
This is probably the most area I've heard the most about in the last 7 years, but it really isn't uncommon for people to be battling with drainage problems in low areas in their yards that are taking runoff from larger areas in these older parts of town. There's an issue right now that we're dealing with in the Lions Park neighborhood where there's an alleyway that isn't an alley, and the water just stands back there and is causing all sorts of nuisance flooding, and those people are fairly disappointed because I'm not bringing a recommendation to the city council that we run storm sewer up in their yards. So it's not nearly the problem that cities that are older than you have, but this one certainly has the unique circumstance of the street project. So.
Okay, council, any further comments, questions? Then we're going to go ahead and table this item, and we'll bring it back once you've had a chance to gather that additional information. You're ready to bring something back for the council to consider.
Do we need a formal motion on that?
Do we?
It was just discussion, so thank you.
Can we give some round idea for Carlson?
A month.
1 month? Okay.
Yep.
That'd be good.
Thank you.
Great, super. Thanks for
you so
coming in.
much.
Thank you all.
Okay, next item, Lori?
Thank you, Mayor. The next item is a recommendation from staff that the fire department PERA pension benefit level be increased to $3,500 per year of service. That would be effective January 1st, 2019. There is a memo included in the packet that goes through it in some detail, and I'll just give you the highlights and then take questions. Essentially, there's been a lot of attention over the last several years in Victoria and elsewhere in the state and country that maintaining the on-call volunteer firefighter model is increasingly challenging, and recruitment and retention are a primary challenge. City of Victoria experienced some retirements and attrition about 5 years ago that were very concerning, and put concerted efforts into really shoring up that model, because it's very cost effective. It's really good for our community image, our community sort of sense of pride, and it was very important to the City Council that we are able to maintain that and don't yet have to move to a duty crew or a full-time fire system. And we've been very fortunate through some hard work and through some great folks on the fire department that we are fully staffed. We have, I believe our allocated number is 32. We had 2 new come on this year, which puts us at a full roster of firefighters. That's not true for other cities in our area, and it's something that I'm very proud of. Our fire chief works hard at that. This council has allocated significant resources to the fire department to make that happen. But as they say, it's not something where we can just say, oh, well, we did a good job, pat ourselves on the back, and move on. So we got to keep on top of this. And one of the ways that we can encourage the retention is to keep our pension amount competitive. Firefighters, they're not in it for the money. The money is probably nice, but they put a lot of their time and their heart and soul on the line, and they have other reasons to do that. But at the same time, all of us have bills to pay and decisions to make about what to do with our time. So the way that the city can participate, or one way, is by keeping their compensation package current. So just briefly, firefighters make $10 an hour for calls and training. And the other benefit that they earn is an annual pension. So for every year of service, they earn a pension benefit. Right now, that benefit is $2,300 a year. So if you left today with 20 years of service, you'd get $2,300 times 20. That benefit right now is scheduled to go to $3,000 a year on January 1st, 2019. So if you had that same 20 years of service now and you stayed until 2019, you'd get 22 years times $3,000 per year. What we're proposing is to increase that amount to $3,500 with retirements beginning January 1st, 2019. That's the only thing I'm asking the council to authorize tonight, is that increase, but we're also outlining a plan that we would relay to members of the fire department of increasing that pension by $500 every 5 years through 2029, when we would hit a $4,500. You might be thinking, like, Gloria, it's great to plan ahead, but why are we talking about 2029? The reason is because that's how retention works. If I'm a firefighter who is got 15 years right now, and I'm sitting down with my financial planner and my spouse and saying, what's our plan here? It's nice to say, okay, well, I know the city is planning to increase at these certain marks, so, why don't we go to 32 years of service, because we know that this is what we're going to be looking at. So that is the reason that we're not just talking about one increase, but we're trying to outline a plan. We also know that we don't know what's going to happen in the financial markets or with the city's budget between now and then. So we're not asking the city council to do anything that would authorize those to be automatically triggered. They would have to be approved by whoever is sitting in your chairs at the appropriate intervals. And we're also outlining some expectations. Attached to the staff report is a funding cost analysis that PERA maintains for us. The city would not experience any additional financial liability as a result of this increase because of the funding level that we are at with our pension fund. And so what we're saying is that we would never come back and recommend that this additional $500 pension increase be implemented unless the funding ratio was at 95% or above. That's a very conservative number. PERA would allow an increase to that as long as the fund was 80% funded. But this has generally been a conservative city, and we're recommending that we stay consistent and conservative here. That funding analysis is provided by PERA at no charge, so there's not any additional liability to the city called for there. That's probably quite a bit of detail, and so I would just be happy to take questions at this time.
Council?
Any issues from a budgetary standpoint?
There are not. We do not anticipate that we would have to make any additional contributions to this fund because of the funding level that it is at currently.
That's true for the 2018 budget year, correct?
Yes, it's also, again, I don't know what would happen with markets, but I wouldn't predict that it would have an impact on 2019 or going forward unless the markets take a big nosedive.
And I'm not suggesting, just, this is more just a statement of kind of what could be, because I know that when the markets were off substantially in the roughly 2010, 2012 area, I think the city had to increase a contribution to this fund to maintain the minimum reserves as required under the PARA rules. So it's not impossible, but I mean, it can happen, but that doesn't mean this isn't the right thing to do.
Yeah, and Councilmember Striegel, you're right. If we fall below a certain funding ratio, the city does have to contribute. I didn't write that number down, but I believe it's 70%. The fund at the $3,500 benefit level that we're proposing is 100% funded. At the $3,000 that we're already scheduled to go to, it's 111%. So I don't think we're putting ourselves in a terribly risky situation by increasing this pension level.
Could you bring up, I can't remember which document it was, but when I was going through the packet, can you bring up the one that shows what we pay our firefighters compared to the surrounding communities?
Yeah. So we've got the chart in the staff report here, just showing some of our surrounding communities, and not suggesting each community is different in terms of resources, model, and call volume. But it's one of those things where these are the areas our volunteer firefighters are likely to relocate to. And so it's important for us to sort of keep an eye on that. The Finance Committee had asked for some additional information on call volume because they were worried that we were significantly behind some of our neighboring communities, our bigger communities like Chaska and Chanhassen. And one thing that we have observed and is true is being on the Chanhassen or Chaska Fire Department, you're required to make 25% of calls per quarter to be an active member of the fire department. That number can vary among departments, but it's true of the three I'm talking about. If you're going to go on 25% of 650 calls, that's a lot more calls than 25% of 250. So it's appropriate that our pension levels would be different, but still important for us to be competitive. You can see Waconia is currently at a $3,500 pension level, and they're on a 5-year freeze until 2020 because they went into the state managed plan just like we did. They go on about 400 calls a year. We all have roughly the same amount of training, so that's fairly equal in terms of our fire departments. Our fire department trains every Monday night.
I assume the training levels are state level guidelines, if not mandates.
For the most part, there are many state and national requirements, and then there might be some optional trainings, or the bigger departments have optional teams that people might participate in, but they are fairly similar.
Do we have an idea of what this call volume looks like as per capita or per firefighter? So if there's 250 calls and 32 firefighters responding, it's X. I'm trying to get a feel for how busy.
Sure. Are you asking how many people go to each call?
I suppose so.
Sure. It really does depend, but on average, we're going to get somewhere between 6 and 18 people per call. If we have a catastrophic call, people work really hard to get there, so we could get everybody. If we had a live fire in town, at some point, most of our firefighters would find their way there. But we had a car accident 2 weeks ago on County Road 11 and 5 by Dairy Queen. Someone ran the stop sign, and we got 14 people that responded. So it just kind of depends.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a required number of calls that they'd have to go on?
Yeah, they have to go on 25% per quarter.
Ours do? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought
Yep.
it was others. Okay.
And the vast majority of our firefighters exceed that requirement, and it's not an issue. Some of them fluctuate seasonally depending on the kind of day job that they have. Our summers can be tough for people because they have jobs that conflict, but that's generally not been an issue for us.
I've been actually a little bit surprised, given the training and the personal commitment, that $10 an hour, which I think this previous council increased that dramatically.
Yeah.
30% or something. It was like $7.50 an hour for that level of commitment. Seems crazy. So we brought that up to 10, and it still seems not, nobody's in it for the money. You're right.
Right. Yeah, and we are, that's the other just sort of minor note that I'm proposing but not needing council or looking to the council to approve, but we're going to go to an annual increase to the fire department pay, looking at 3% in 2018, something that's comparable to what other city employees are getting, so that we don't continue to lose ground on that and we don't have to make those big jumps. You're right, they're not in it for particularly the call pay, but I think it's still important to be on a predictable schedule that's stable for our budget.
These are highly trained people that are being paid like hamburger flippers, or less than hamburger flippers. So
Yeah.
You don't get tips.
I will say that the Finance Committee was very keenly in tune with that point, that perhaps it would be appropriate to look at that $10 an hour wage, given that the council has already adopted the preliminary levy and budget for 2018. That's not something that I'm proposing we look at now, but it was something that the Finance Committee certainly recommended and something I would bring forward as part of the strategic plan to see if the council is interested.
Thank you.
Further comments, questions? If not, can we get the resolution up on the screen, please?
I've got it here. I'll go ahead and make it. I'll make a motion to adopt resolution increasing the para benefit level to $3,500 per year of service effective January 1st, 2019.
second motion.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Resolution passes unanimously. Okay, thank you. The last item for new business, I asked Lori to put on, and this is a simple item I'd like the council to consider, and that is basically the creation of a water quality committee. I've talked with a number of residents and a number of leaders of various lake associations around the city, and the concept is quite simply, we have a lot of expertise in this particular issue. And I'd like to consider, especially when we had discussions a couple of meetings ago about the watershed and input into that process in their annual planning cycle, this water quality committee I would see as being made up of citizen-selected leaders from their lake owners associations that would, for each one within the city, if they want to create an association and elect somebody, that person would be a member of this committee. The council then, in addition, would select one or two other, depending on what the council thought, as people other than just somebody on the lake to consider things like the stormwater ponds and other issues that we have coming up. And we have to start looking at as far as the future. And the idea being this committee would then start digging into some of these water quality issues, just like other committees do, and try to come up with recommendations or things for the council to consider related specifically to water quality. So that's the concept behind it. That's what I was thinking when I asked Lori to put it on there. And so with that, let me turn it over to the council for questions, discussion, thoughts.
So I'm interested in having the committee, but I think before we vote to move forward with it, I would want to understand the makeup, the charter, the objectives, what is their intended, what are they going to, what's their purpose, and how will they be providing information to us? And if we have that information, then I think it's appropriate for the council to consider.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Lori, I don't know what your timing is. I think you have at least the general concept. You and I have talked a little bit about this, but I'd be happy to sit down with you and give you more of my thoughts, at least in terms of being able to develop a staff report that could then come back to the council for consideration and discussion.
Sure.
Yeah, and I would echo that, something of a mission vision kind of thing, to the effect that if we were asking people to sign up, volunteer for it, what is it that they're signing up and volunteering for? And also, this, I assume, would be formally constructed as an official commission of the city council with appropriate meeting guidelines, et cetera, open meeting, notifications, et cetera. I would suggest that we not, while certainly lake shore owners are maybe more invested in it, we all have a vested interest, and whether we're just users of the lakes or whether we're owners of, lake shore. And so I would want to make sure there's, without getting the thing too big, appropriate representation from just citizens at large, not necessarily, wouldn't want to fill it up with only HOA, Lakeshore members.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to any of that. The idea being all of these things, I want to get something together to get the discussion started with the council. Do we actually have mission statements or charters for the other committees?
I believe so. I guess I'd have to look into that. I didn't.
Yeah, I think that if we don't, I think it's a good idea for the council to consider that for the exact same reasons mentioned tonight. Unless the council has other comments, what I'd like to be able to do is then to kind of maybe sit down with Lori, kind of outline some of this, get the comments together, or maybe if the council would prefer, maybe each of us individually send our thoughts to Lori, and Lori, if you could just kind of consolidate those and put them into a staff report, giving the other demands, and get something back to us once you've had a chance to kind of go through that.
I would also appreciate input from the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, and maybe they would be willing to participate in the committee also. I'm sure they've been exposed or have seen other such organizations. Their input would be valuable.
They are a water quality organization.
Exactly.
Would they participate in a city committee like that? I have no objections to that if they would. I just don't know if they would.
Yeah, it's something that we could look at. I know one of the things I had suggested to the council is that the Watershed District does have a citizen, do you remember the official title?
Citizen Advisory Committee.
Thank you. And they are accepting applications for that through November. So I had sent you the link, and I'd be happy to send it again. But that's definitely a way I would encourage our residents to get involved.
All right, so I don't think we need a resolution. Council, unless there's further comments or questions, I'd like to ask each of us to kind of consider this a little bit. Send your thoughts to Lori to individually for her to collect. And then once you've had a chance to put something together, come back to the council with some suggestions.
Sure, be happy to.
Council, is that fair?
Yes. Very good.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, we'll move into reports. Okay, Lori, reports?
There are a couple of items of correspondence that I'm happy to take questions about. I also want to highlight that work on the comp plan has been going on for the better part of this year with the comp plan steering committee that was appointed by the council. And we are getting to the point where we're going to start having more feedback from city council, our committees, and the public. So as you know, you all have a joint meeting with the Park and Rec Committee and the Planning Commission next Monday at 7 o'clock. And on October 25th, which is a Wednesday, from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., there is an open house, meaning that people can come. You don't need to be here for 3 hours. Come and go as schedules allow. That's here at City Hall. Would really encourage anybody who's interested. I know this council has certainly seen the way that the comp plan sets the tone for decisions that will be made for years to come, and so I understand that our residents are busy. But I would just highlight this as a really important time to participate. And if you can come for 10 minutes, that's great. If you can come for 2 hours and really get into it, that's great too, but we'd be happy to have any input.
And there's no issue as far as if we end up with 3 council members here at the same time?
No, that's been posted as an open meeting. And
all right, we're fine then. Anything else?
No, Mayor, thank you.
Yeah, Bob?
Mayor, no, I have nothing to report.
Councilmember Crowley?
Nothing to report.
Councilmember Striegel?
Not so much a report as, I guess, a request. Earlier this year, the Victoria for a Lifetime Committee resigned en masse, and I think we all agreed to let it settle for a little time. But I feel the absence of their input. We've got significant projects, we've got comp plan, we've got a number of things that I think are important to the city, and their input is valued. So I think it's a bit of a stain on our city to not have that commission staffed and operating and contributing. And I would like to, I guess, what do we need to do to restart the process or start the process of reconstituting it? And I specifically would like to see conversation with those former members as a starting point to say, what would it take for them to come back? I think they put a lot of themselves into it. They are, we're very committed, and I would really like to see them rejoin the volunteer ranks here. I guess that's my request to my fellow council members, is to support getting that back on track and moving forward.
Absolutely support it.
I have no objections.
Exactly.
If you want to come back, that's fine. Anything else?
That's all for me.
Okay, Councilmember Vogt?
Nothing to report. I would like to put in a plug for one of my favorite organizations, the Victoria Library. It's one of the biggest assets the city has, and it's right below us. I'll give you a couple of things I just was recently made aware of. There was a children's reading program this past summer, and that program offered 56 individual programs and was attended by 3,378 kids. 3,378. So, I mean, it was a tremendous success, and it's just an example of what's going on downstairs. Our Victoria Library is known not just in Carver County, but throughout the regional library system as the Technology Library, the place to go for new ways to use library resources. So I urge everyone to remember that the library is downstairs, and it is a really tremendous asset to the community.
Good news. Good to hear. Anything else?
Nothing else.
Councilmember Gregory?
No report.
I have no report. At this point, I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned.
Took a minute to get a second. I thought maybe you guys wanted to hang out for a while.